It was late evening and the sky had begun to cast an ominous orange hue as Arthur drove along the winding road near Lake Haruna, returning from a weekend trip. The route was quiet, with not a soul in sight. Suddenly his car jolted to a halt, the steering wheel pulling hard to the right. Startled, he pulled over to check what had happened. When he stepped out, he noticed both his front tires were completely flat. Confused, Arthur knelt down to inspect them and found odd wooden spikes embedded in the rubber. They were sharp and unnatural, almost as if deliberately placed. But by who? He was miles from the nearest town, and the only thing around was the lake. Feeling uneasy, Arthur called for a tow truck and a cab, both of which would take time to arrive. As the minutes dragged on, he leaned against his car, nervously glancing at the trees lining the road. Then he saw something out of the corner of his eye. Children. Two small figures were darting between the trees near the lake, their small bodies moving too quickly to be human. At first he thought they were kids playing. Perhaps local troublemakers, but something about them seemed off. Their laughter was faint, but echoed eerily across the water. "Hey!" Arthur shouted, his voice breaking the stillness. He instinctively thought they might have something to do with the spikes in his tires. He decided to chase after them, the adrenaline pushing him forward without a second thought. As the children ran toward the lake, they giggled and looked back at him, taunting him to follow. Arthur sprinted after them, his heart racing, unaware of the growing mist that began to swirl around the lake's edge. He wasn't thinking clearly, he just wanted answers. When he reached the water's edge, the children seemed to disappear, their silhouettes dissolving into the mist. His breath heavy, Arthur realized with dread that he had no idea where he was. The surroundings had changed, and the lake looked wrong. The water shimmered unnaturally, and strange ripples formed despite no wind blowing. Suddenly the water shifted. From beneath its surface, grotesque figures began to emerge. The Kappa, mythical creatures Arthur had only ever heard about in folklore. Their slimy, turtle-like bodies shimmered in the fading light, their beady eyes gleaming with hunger. Their webbed hands reached out of the water, and their sharp beaks let out guttural croaks that chilled Arthur to his core. He stumbled backward in shock. He had unknowingly crossed into their domain, lured by what he now realized were not children at all, but something far worse, creatures sent to trap him. Arthur turned to run, but it was too late. The Kappas moved swiftly, surrounding him, cutting off his escape. He tried to back away, but the muddy ground by the water's edge pulled at his feet, dragging him closer to their cold, clammy clutches. Realizing there was no way out, Arthur let out a desperate scream, but the sound was swallowed by the mist. The last thing he saw was a Kappa's grinning, sharp-toothed mouth descending toward him, before the darkness of the lake closed in. Days later, when the tow truck arrived, Arthur's car was found abandoned by the lake, its tires still flat. But of Arthur there was no trace, just the eerie silence of the water and the faint sound of children laughing in the distance.